If your organization touches a single file of federal contract data, a drawing, a spec sheet, a name tied to a government contract, then somewhere in your compliance stack, NIST 800-171 is waiting for you. Today, we are breaking down the entire standard, what it protects, how it's structured, and exactly what an auditor is going to look for when they walk in the door. This Mastering NIST 800-171, part of the Stay Ahead Cybersecurity Auditor Mastery series. Every year, thousands of US federal contractors, subcontractors, and universities handle sensitive but unclassified government information. What's officially called Controlled Unclassified Information or CUI. NIST 800-171 exists to make sure that information stays protected wherever it lives outside the federal government's own system. The requirement traces back to the TFARS Clause 252.2047012, which tells Department of Defense contractors, if you want to do business with us, you implement these safeguards, full stop. And today, the same standard underpins the entire CMMC ecosystem. So understanding 800-171 is good practice. It's the foundation. Everything else is built on. What is controlled unclassified information? What exactly is CUI? It's the information the government creates or possesses, or that a contractor creates or possesses on the government's behalf that requires safeguarding under law, regulation, or government-wide policy, but is not classified. Think technical drawings, export control data, procurement sensitive documents, or personally identifiable information tied to a contract. CUI is labeled according to the CUI registry maintained by the National Archives. It requires access control, encryption, else equivalent to the controls we are about to walk through. Here's the part people underestimate. Applicability flows down the entire supply chain. Starts with the DoD or a federal agent, goes to the prime contractor, down to every subcontractor, and even into university and research labs doing federally funded work. Anyone who stores, processes, or transmits CUI inherits the obligation. If your system never touches CUI and only supports unrelated commercial operations, you're out of scope. But the moment CUI enters your environment, even though a single subcontract you're in. Structurally, NIST 800-171 organizes its requirements in 14 controlled families, each targeting a distinct dimension of security, from who's allowed to log in, to how incidents gets handled, to how media gets destroyed at end of life. In total, that's 110 individual controls broken down further into roughly 320 assessment objectives that an auditor will actually score you against. 14 families, 110 controls, one framework. Compliance dashboard. Auditors typically track all 14 families on a single dashboard, mapping maturity family by family before rolling everything into one overall compliance score. Use words like AC for access control, AU for audit and accountability, and SE for system and communications protection. And in the next chapter, we are going to go through every single one of these 14 families one at a time. This control. This control is the biggest family in the entire standard with 22 controls, and exactly what it sounds like. Restricting system access to authorized users, processors, and devices. That means enforcing least privilege, requiring multi-factor authentication, and controlling session activity so the exposure stays limited. On premises, that might look like Active Directory with tiered admin groups, smart card MFA, and a 15-minute idle session lockout. In the cloud, think AWS IAM with role-based least privilege and conditional enforced through service control policy. AT awareness and training has just three controls. But don't let that fool you. It's about making sure managers, administrators, and everyday users actually recognize threats like phishing and social engineering before they become incidents. On-prem, that's onboarding brief and annual refresher workshops. The cloud era, it's learning management, delivering quarterly feedback per user. AU Audit and Accountability. Audit and accountability covers 9 controls focused on creating, protecting, and retaining system audit logs so you can monitor, investigate, and report unauthorized activity. On-prem, picture SIEM ingesting Windows event logs and firewall logs with 12 months of retention. In the cloud, that's CloudTrail feeding centralized log analytics with mutable retention and automated alerting. Configuration management. 11 controls is about establishing baseline configurations and inventory, controlling every change so nothing gets modified on a system handling CUI without approval. On-prem, that's golden image server builds that go through a change advisory port. The cloud is infrastructure as code baselines with drift detection and automated remediation. Identification and authentication. 11 controls requires you to identify every user and processes, then authenticate that identity using strong phishing resistant methods before granting access. On-prem, think PKI smart cards tied to Active Directory certificate authentication. In the cloud, federated single sign-on with FIDO2 hardware keys across your SaaS applications. Incident response has only 3 controls, but it's one auditor scrutinize closely. Establish an operational incident handling capability covering preparation, detection, analysis, containment, and recovery tested periodically. On-prem, that's a documented playbook with tabletop exercises twice a year. The cloud native SOAR playbooks that auto isolate a compromised workload within minutes. Maintenance. 6 controls governs how you perform periodic system maintenance, critically who and what is allowed to conduct it. On-prem, that's escorted vendor maintenance using only sanitized diagnostic data. In the cloud, vendor manage patch windows running on pre-approved automation. Media protection. 9 controls covers both paper and digital media, requiring sanitization or destruction before disposal or reuse. So CUI never leaks out through a decommissioned device. On-prem, that's locked media storage cabinets and NIST 888 compliant physical shredding. The cloud, AES 256 encryption at rest with cryptographic erasure the moment data is deleted. Yes, personal security. Just 2 controls require screening individuals before they get access to CUI systems and protecting the environment during and after personal actions like termination or transfer. On-prem, that same day badge and account deactivation coordinated between HR and IT. The cloud, IAM access auto revokes the instant HR triggers a termination. Physical protection. Physical protection 6 controls limits physical access to systems and facilities to authorized individuals with monitoring and logging of who comes and goes. On-prem, that's a batch control server room, visitor logs, and 90 days of CCTV retention. In the cloud, that physical security is inherited from the provider under the shared responsibility model. RA risk assessment. D controls requires periodically assessing risk to your operations and CUI from how your system processes, store and transmit it. On-prem, that's quarterly vulnerability scans with manual updates to a risk register. In the cloud, continuous vulnerability scanning with risk score dashboards updating daily. CA security assessment. Security assessment 4 controls is about periodically assessing your security controls, developing plans of actions to fix deficiencies, and monitoring controls on an ongoing basis. On-prem, that's an annual third-party assessment supplemented by internal self-testing. In the cloud, continuous compliance monitoring through cloud-native posture management. System and communications protection. The second largest family, 16 controls focused on monitoring and controlling communications at system boundaries and using architecture and encryption to protect CUI in transit. On-prem, that's next-gen firewalls with network segmentation and site-to-site IPsec VPN. The cloud, VPC boundary controls, TLS 1.2 are higher everywhere, and a managed web application firewall at the edge. System and information integrity. Closing out the 14 families. System and information integrity, 7 controls, identifying, reporting, and correcting system flaws quickly while protecting against malicious code and monitoring of for signs of compromise. On-prem, that's an endpoint protection platform with monthly patch cycles and signature updates. In the cloud, managed patch orchestration with automated malware detection at the workload level. That's all 14 families, and together they are the backbone of every 800.171. Mapping to other standards, here's some good news. Once you have implemented NIST 800.171 controls, most of them map cleanly onto other frameworks you're likely being assessed against, which cuts down on duplicate evidence collection. Access control lines up with ISO 27001 A9 and SOC 2 C6 logical access criteria. Audit and accountability maps to ISO's logging clause and SOC criteria, incident response system and communication protection, risk assessment, they all have direct counterparts in NIST CSF and CMMC. In practice, overlap at the control intent level typically exceeds 70%. The differences shows up mainly in evidentiary depth and how often you're expected to reassess. From zero to audit ready. So how does this actually get implemented in the real world? A practical program follows 5 discipline steps and each one produces evidence. The next step depends on step 1 gap assessment. Show your current state against all 110 controls and identify shortfalls using an SPRS style scoring model. Step 2 POA&M development. Document every open gap with an owner, remediation plan, and a target closure date. Step 3 policy creation. Step 4 technical deployment, where you actually build the controls out. And step 5 evidence collection. Screenshots, configuration exports, logs, and signed policies all mapped to each specific control ID for the assessor. Skip a step here and you will feel it during the audit. Cloud was on premises. It's worth passing on something we have touched throughout this video. NIST 800.171 is deployment agnostic, but how you satisfy it looks very different depending on where your CUI actually lives. On premises, you own every control outright, physical firewalls, patch controlled server rooms, locally managed patching and backups. Nothing is inherited, nothing is shared. In the cloud, you're working with the shared responsibility model. The provider handles pieces like physical data, center security, while you are responsible for configuration, identity, and monitoring. FedRAMP, authorized services, elastic logging, and provider managed compliance tooling like Azure Government or Government Cloud can Governance Cloud can genuinely simplify your inherited controls, but only if you understand exactly where the provider's responsibility ends and yours begins. Where assessments go wrong. Let's talk about where assessments actually go wrong. Because the same handful of findings show up again and again. Number one, weak access control. Chat admin accounts and missing MFA remain the single most common finding. Number two, missing incident response plans or plans that exist on paper but have never been tested because tabletop exercises get skipped. Number three, poor logging practices. Logs exist but nobody is centrally reviewing them, alerting on them, or retaining them long enough. Number four, lack of encryption. CUI found traveling over unencrypted protocols or sitting at rest on an unencrypted laptop. You fix nothing else after watching this video. These automating complaints, continuous complaint. The most mature complaints programs stop treating this as an annual fire drill and shift towards continuous automated assurance. That means SIEM correlation for real-time alerting across every single control family. Automated scheduled vulnerability scanning with risk scoring instead of a scan you run once and forget. Continuous control monitoring dashboards instead of a point in time snapshot once a year. and GRC platform integration that automatically maps your evidence to the right control ID. So you're not scrambling to reconstruct it right before an assessor arrives. Automation doesn't replace the discipline, it just means you're never caught flat footed. NIST 800-171 exists to protect the information our national security and industrial base depend on. 14 families, 110 controls, one discipline program, and now we have walked through every piece of it, from what CUI actually is to the exact findings that trip up most organizations during an audit. If this helped you make sense of the standards, subscribe to Stay Ahead for more cybersecurity auditor mastery courses. And thank you to our series sponsor, Audit.site, for making sure this one possible. See you in the next one.